Silence cut through the room like a knife as I walked through the courtroom doors. Each step echoed on the marble floor as I walked toward the defendant's bench, my impeccably pressed military uniform reflecting the fluorescent lights on the ceiling. "Seriously, James?" my brother Marcus whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear, a sarcastic laugh escaping his lips. "You came dressed as a soldier? How pathetic." The judge looked up from his documents, his expression changing completely when he saw me. His pen stopped midair, suspended as if time had frozen. For a long moment, no one moved. No one even breathed. My name is James Carter, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I would be sued by my own brother over the inheritance our grandfather left me. But here I was, wearing the uniform I hadn't worn in 3 years, feeling the weight of the medals on my chest like silent reminders of everything my family never knew about me. Marcus continued whispering venomous comments to his lawyer, clearly enjoying what he considered my pathetic desperation. Look at him, trying to impress the judge with this ridiculous charade. As if wearing a costume would change anything. But there was something in the magistrate's expression that my brother didn't notice. Something that made my stomach clench with a mixture of hope and terror. Judge Harold Morrison wasn't looking at me as if he were seeing just another veteran trying to win sympathy. He was looking at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Commander Carter," he murmured, so quietly that only the clerk closest to him could hear. His hands trembled slightly as he lowered his reading glasses. "My God, is it really you?" The entire room turned to stare at me. Marcus stopped laughing abruptly, confusion replacing the arrogance on his face. His wife Jennifer, sitting in the front row with her expensive heels and designer handbag, frowned as if trying to solve a puzzle. I just nodded to the judge, maintaining my perfect military posture. "Yes, Your Honor." What they didn't know, what none of them ever bothered to find out, was that I wasn't just another ordinary veteran fighting for an inheritance. During my 8 years of service, I had led missions that saved hundreds of lives. I had received decorations that most soldiers only dream of seeing. I had scars that told stories of heroism that my own family never wanted to hear. Marcus always saw me as the failed brother who ran away to the army because he couldn't find a real job. Our mother used to tell the neighbors that I was playing soldier, while Marcus was building a real estate empire. She never mentioned that I was on the other side of the world, carrying wounded comrades through minefields. As the judge continued to stare at me with an expression that mixed disbelief with something close to reverence, I felt a familiar sense of calm wash over me. It was the same tranquility I felt before the most dangerous missions, when I knew I was about to do something that would change everything. "Before we proceed," the judge said, his voice gaining strength, "I need to clarify something with the court." He rose slowly, and everyone in the room instinctively followed suit. "Gentlemen, ladies, we are in the presence of an American war hero." Marcus blinked several times, as if he couldn't process the words. "Hero? He's just my brother who—" Silence. The judge's order cut through the air like a whip. For the first time in my life, I saw my older brother completely speechless. If you're following this story of family, betrayal, and hidden truths, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple inheritance turned into the stage for the most shocking revelation our town has ever witnessed. Because what was about to happen in that courtroom wasn't just about money or property. It was about who I really was, and why my own blood never wanted to know the truth. Marcus had always been the golden son. The son who stayed home, married the local banker's daughter, and built a real estate speculation business that impressed our aunts at Sunday lunches. While I was defending convoys in Afghanistan, he was buying undervalued properties and reselling them to out-of-state investors. "Your little brother's finally home," he would tell his friends when I visited on leave. "After playing hero in the desert." The tone was always laced with condescension, as if serving my country was some rebellious teenage phase that had gone on too long. The inheritance that brought us here was more than just property. Our grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had left me a 47-acre farm on the outskirts of town, along with the house he built with his own hands when he returned from the war. It was a decision Marcus could never accept. "Why the hell did the old man leave everything to you?" he had shouted on the day the will was read 3 years ago. "I'm the oldest. I'm the one who stayed here and took care of him when you were on the other side of the world." What Marcus never understood was that our grandfather saw something in him that the rest of the family chose to ignore. In his last weeks of life, when I returned home on medical leave after being wounded in combat, we spent hours talking on the porch of the farmhouse. He told me stories about soul, about losing friends, about coming home with invisible scars. The Carters have always served with honor, he told me one August afternoon, pointing to the medals framed on the living room wall. Marcus doesn't understand that. He thinks honor is something you buy. But my family never saw it that way. When I enlisted at 18, my mother cried as if I were going to hell itself. My father shook his head and muttered something about wasting a college education. Marcus just laughed and said I was running away from real responsibility. They never asked about the missions. They never wanted to know about the times I carried wounded soldiers through minefields in Iraq, or about the rescue operation in Kabul that saved 17 American civilians trapped in hostile territory. When I received the Bronze Star for Valor in Combat, I sent a photo home. Marcus replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The truth is, they were ashamed of me. In a town where success was measured in square footage and bank account numbers, a soldier was an uncomfortable reminder that there were things more important than money. Marcus fit perfectly into the local narrative of progress and prosperity. I was the black sheep who chose to serve strangers instead of serving family. When I came back wounded 3 years ago, with metal shrapnel still lodged in my left knee and nightmares that woke me up drenched in sweat, they expected me to finally grow up and get a normal job. Marcus even offered me a position at his company. Office work, he said, patting me on the shoulder as if he were talking to a child. Nothing too complicated. You can use your experience, military, to handle security or something. I refused. I used my severance pay to buy a small private security business, offering protection for executives and risk prevention consulting. Honest work that allowed me to use my skills without compromising my principles. But to Marcus, it was just more proof that I was a failure. The last straw came last year, during our Aunt Helen's funeral. Marcus drank too much at the wake and started ranting about how unfair it was that the prodigal son had inherited the family's most valuable property. He doesn't even live there. Marcus practically yelled to anyone who would listen. The house is empty, the land unused. Meanwhile, I have a family to support, businesses to expand. But of course, the golden boy gets everything. That was the night he hired a lawyer. The legal strategy was simple and cruel. They claimed that I had abandoned the property by not residing there permanently, and that Marcus, as the older brother and only locally established member of the family, should take over the administration of the family assets. They had witnesses ready to attest that the farm was neglected, conveniently omitting that I had hired caretakers to maintain the property and that I visited regularly to make repairs. The lawsuit was a calculated humiliation. Marcus made sure the whole town knew about the dispute, painting me as a greedy brother who wanted to keep property he didn't deserve while he, the model citizen, was forced to fight in court for what was rightfully his. It's a shame, I heard Mrs. Morrison comment at the supermarket. A hard-working man like Marcus having to sue his own brother over a poorly written will. What they didn't know, what Marcus had no idea about, was the folder of documents I kept in the bank vault. Letters of recommendation from generals. Classified mission reports that had recently been declassified. Photographs of award ceremonies that my family never bothered to attend. And most importantly, an audio recording my grandfather made 2 weeks before he died, explaining exactly why he was leaving the farm to me and not Marcus. A recording that my private attorney had already authenticated and prepared as evidence, should it be needed. But as Judge Morrison continued to stare at me with that expression of growing reverence, I realized that I might not need to play any of these cards. His reaction suggested something much bigger than a simple family dispute. Marcus, finally noticing the strange silence in the room, frowned and whispered loudly to his lawyer, "Why is everyone looking at him like that? It's just an old uniform." What my brother was about to discover was that some uniforms carry more history than he ever imagined possible. "Commander Carter," the judge repeated, this time loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Mr. Morrison, excuse me for a moment." Marcus turned to his lawyer, whispering furiously. "Commander? He was never commander of anything. He's just a private who came back crippled from the desert." But the expression on Judge Morrison's face was not that of someone confused or impressed by a nice uniform. It was that of someone who knew exactly who was standing before him. His hands trembled slightly as he leafed through some papers on the table, as if he were looking to confirm something he already knew. "Your Honor," Marcus's lawyer interjected, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the hearing was taking. "If we may resume normal proceedings, my clients would like to present evidence of abandonment of the property." In a moment, the judge cut him off, without taking his eyes off me. "Commander, Did you serve in the 2nd Marine Reconnaissance Battalion? The question cut through the air like a blade. I felt my chest tighten, not with nervousness, but with a strange sense of validation I hadn't felt in years. Yes, sir. From 2012 to 2020. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus blinked several times, his expression shifting from confusion to something close to panic. He had never bothered to ask about my rank or unit. To him, I was just the brother who went off to play soldier. My son served in the same unit, the judge said softly, his voice carrying a weight I recognized immediately. It was the tone veterans use when they talk about comrades who didn't make it home. Corporal Timothy Morrison. He didn't make it back from Helmand. The world stopped for a moment. Helmand. I knew that name, that operation, that pain. I searched my memory, trying to remember if I knew a Corporal Morrison, but there were so many faces, so many missions, so many losses that sometimes they blurred together in a painful fog. Sir, I said, my voice lower, more respectful. I'm sorry for your loss. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time in his life, he was in a room where he wasn't the center of attention, where he didn't control the narrative. Jennifer, his wife, whispered something in his ear, but he dismissed her with an irritated gesture. What the hell is going on here? Marcus muttered loudly enough to be heard. This is about property, not war. The coldness in his voice made several people in the gallery turn to stare at him. An elderly woman in the 3rd row shook her head disapprovingly. A man wearing a veteran's cap crossed his arms and frowned. It was at that moment that I realized something important. I was not alone in that room. There were at least 5 or 6 veterans in the gallery, men and women who had probably come out of curiosity about the Carter case that had spread throughout the city. Now they were watching my brother publicly disrespect not only me, but the memory of the judge's son. Marcus, his wife whispered, tugging at his sleeve. Maybe you should. Should what? He retorted, his voice rising. Pretend I'm impressed by this charade? He's wearing that uniform to gain sympathy. It's pure manipulation. The judge banged his gavel once, softly. Mr. Carter, please maintain order in my courtroom. But the damage was done. Marcus had shown his true colors to a room full of people, including veterans who understood the weight I had carried for 8 years. I could see the change in the expressions around me, the way people shifted slightly, creating a subtle but noticeable distance between themselves and my brother. During the 15-minute break, something extraordinary happened. Tom Bradley, a Vietnam veteran I knew vaguely from the local auto shop, approached me in the hallway. James, he said, extending his hand. I didn't know you were in the 2nd Reconnaissance. My grandson served with you in Afghanistan. Before I could respond, a woman joined us. It was Sarah Williams, whose daughter had been a military nurse. After her came Mike Rodriguez, who lost his right arm in Iraq. Within minutes, I was surrounded by a support network I didn't know existed. Your brother is playing the fool, Tom muttered, low enough that only our small circle could hear. Half the town knows you deserve this property. Your grandfather spoke of you with great pride. It hit me like a punch in the stomach. He did. Sarah smiled sadly. Every Thursday at the pharmacy. He showed the letters you sent, talked about your medals. He said you were just like his father, who served in World War II. I didn't know my grandfather kept my letters. I didn't know he talked about me. All those years I felt like the forgotten son. He was telling strangers about my service. The irony was bitter. The whole town knew more about my military career than my own family. When we returned to the courtroom, Marcus seemed to have calmed down slightly, but there was a new tension in his shoulders. His lawyer had clearly used the break to explain that attacking a decorated veteran in front of a judge who had lost a son in combat was not a smart legal strategy. Your Honor, Marcus's lawyer began again, his voice more cautious. Returning to the issue of the property, we would like to present evidence that my client has been the only member of the family to maintain regular contact with the property since Mr. Carter's death. But I had reached a point of no return. Sitting there, listening to Marcus lie about taking care of the farm I had financially supported for 3 years, watching him try to steal the only thing my grandfather had left me, was more than I could bear. I stood up slowly. Your Honor, may I present evidence to the contrary? The judge nodded. Go ahead, Commander. I opened my briefcase and took out 3 years of tax payment receipts, all in my name. Then the maintenance bills I had paid to keep the property in good condition. And finally, the letter my grandfather had written to me 2 weeks before he died. "Sir," I said, my voice firm and clear. "This is a letter my grandfather wrote explaining why he was leaving the property to me. And these are 3 years of documents proving that I have been solely responsible for the financial maintenance of the property." Marcus stood up abruptly. "That's impossible. I pay." "Marcus," I interrupted him, looking directly into his eyes. "You lied. To the court, to the city, and to yourself." It was at that moment that I made the decision that would change everything. It was no longer about the property. It was about honor, truth, and the respect my grandfather deserved. Marcus had made it personal when he decided to attack my military service. Now he would find out exactly who he was messing with. "And Your Honor," I continued, my voice gaining the authority I had learned to wield on the battlefield, "I have an audio recording of my grandfather, made 2 weeks before his death, explaining not only why he left me the estate, but also why he specifically did not leave it to my brother." Marcus's face drained of color. His wife held him by the arm, whispering urgently in his ear. The lawyer began frantically leafing through his papers, searching for some legal objection. But I wasn't finished yet. I had saved the best for last, and Marcus was about to discover that underestimating a decorated veteran had been the biggest mistake of his life. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence in the room. "Before playing my grandfather's recording, I would like to present some documents that clarify exactly why he made this decision." Marcus leaned forward, whispering something angry to his lawyer. I could catch fragments: theater, manipulation, dirty tricks. His arrogance was intact, even in the face of the evidence I had presented. He still believed he could get around the situation with charm and local connections. What Marcus didn't understand was that I had spent the last 3 days meticulously preparing for this moment. Not only gathering financial documents, but also contacting people he would never imagine I knew. People who could confirm every detail of my military career, every mission, every award that my family had chosen to ignore. I opened a second folder, this one much thicker than the first. "Your Honor, I have here letters of recommendation from 3 different generals, mission reports declassified by the Pentagon last year, and photographs of award ceremonies where I received the Bronze Star with Valor device, the Purple Heart Medal, and the Combat Service Medal." The murmuring in the gallery intensified. I heard someone whisper Bronze Star reverently. Marcus, however, just rolled his eyes. "More theater," he muttered loud enough to be heard. As if medals changed the fact that he abandoned the family property. It was then that Judge Morrison did something unexpected. He rose from his chair, his eyes fixed on the medals on my chest. "Commander Carter, did you say Bronze Star with device for valor?" "Yes, sir." "And when was it awarded?" "December 2019, sir. Operation in the Helmand Valley." The judge's face paled visibly. He sat down heavily, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his glasses. "December 2019. Helmand." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus frowned, finally realizing that something was happening beyond his comprehension. "What about December 2019? He asked impatiently. The judge did not respond to Marcus. Instead, he addressed me directly, his voice heavy with emotion. "Commander, were you present at the rescue operation in Helmand? The one that saved 17 soldiers trapped behind enemy lines?" My chest tightened. "Yes, sir. I led the rescue team." "My son," the judge whispered, "Timothy Morrison. Corporal Timothy Morrison. He was among the 17. The world stopped. Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times, like a fish out of water. Jennifer held his arm, her eyes wide. Marcus's lawyer dropped the pen he was holding. "Timothy Morrison," I repeated, and suddenly the memory came flooding back. A blonde-haired boy, no more than 19, with a smile that lit up any bunker. He had taken shrapnel in the shoulder during the initial attack. I carried him personally during the last 3 kilometers of the evacuation. "He talked about his father," I said softly. "He said he wanted to be a judge like you when he got home." Tears rolled silently down Judge Morrison's face. The entire room was mesmerized, witnessing a moment of human connection that transcended any legal proceedings. Marcus tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, this is very touching, but it doesn't change the legal fact that," his voice faltered when he saw the expressions around the room. Veterans in the gallery stared at him with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. Even his own lawyer looked embarrassed. "Marcus," I said, my voice firm but not hostile. "For 8 years, you called me a failure. You said I was playing soldier while you built your real estate empire. You never asked about my service, never wanted to know where I was or what I was doing." He opened his mouth to respond, but I continued. "While you were buying and selling properties here at home, I was carrying wounded soldiers through minefields. While you were closing deals in air-conditioned offices, I was coordinating medical evacuations under enemy fire. And when I received honors that any American family would be proud to celebrate, you sent a thumbs-up emoji." The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Marcus was no longer the prosperous son fighting an ungrateful brother. He was the man who had spent decades belittling a decorated war hero. If you're following this story of family honor and belated recognition, subscribe to the channel, because what's about to happen will show how the truth always finds a way to come out, even when it takes us years to recognize it. "Your Honor," I continued, removing a sealed envelope from the briefcase. "This is the recording my grandfather made 2 weeks before he died. It explains not only why he left me the estate, but also his exact words about Marcus and the kind of men we each became." Marcus stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove that this recording is authentic." "Actually," the judge said, his voice regaining its judicial authority, "we can easily verify that. And given the extraordinary nature of this hearing, I would very much like to hear Mr. Carter's final words." It was at that moment that I realized I had reached the point of no return. The recording would not only confirm my version of events, it would reveal truths about our family that would forever change how we saw each other. Marcus was about to discover not only what our grandfather really thought of him, but also why a man who had dedicated his life to military service had chosen to leave his legacy to the grandson who followed in his footsteps, rather than the one who stayed home counting money. As the judge set up the audio equipment, I saw Marcus whispering frantically with his lawyer. For the first time since we entered that room, he looked genuinely concerned. And he had reason to be. Because our grandfather's voice was about to speak from beyond the grave, and his words would forever shatter the narrative Marcus had constructed about himself and our family. The audio equipment was adjusted, and the room fell into expectant silence. Marcus whispered frantically with his lawyer, trying to find some legal objection to prevent the recording from being played. But Judge Morrison had made his decision, and his authority in the room was absolute. "Before we play the recording," I said, taking one last folder out of my briefcase, "I would like to clarify some facts that my brother has misrepresented to the court." Marcus stood up abruptly. "Enough of this charade. You can't turn this hearing into a military spectacle." The judge's gavel struck once, firmly. "Mr. Carter, one more interruption like that and I will hold you in contempt of court. Sit down." The coldness in the magistrate's voice made Marcus back down. For the first time since we had entered the room, he looked genuinely frightened. Jennifer tugged at his sleeve, whispering urgently for him to control himself. "Your Honor," I continued, my voice maintaining the respectful but firm tone I had learned in the military. "My brother claimed that the property was abandoned and neglected. I have here photographs dated from the last 3 years showing all the improvements I have made to the property, along with the corresponding receipts." I spread the photos across the table. The painted house, the repaired roof, the fixed fences, the restored garden. Marcus opened and closed his mouth several times, as if trying to find words that didn't exist. He also claimed that he was the only member of the family in regular contact with the property, I continued. In fact, Marcus visited the farm exactly 3 times in the last 3 years. All of them to take potential buyers to evaluate the land for subdivision. The murmuring in the gallery intensified. Marcus had tried to sell land he didn't even own. The contempt on the faces of those present was palpable. "That's not." "I never," Marcus stammered, but his wife cut him off with a mortified look. Jennifer had realized that every word he said only dug him deeper into a hole. "And now," the judge said solemnly, "we will hear the words of the late Mr. Carter." The audio began with the sound of chairs scraping and a familiar cough. My grandfather's voice, weaker than I remembered, but still carrying that quiet authority he always had, filled the room. "My name is Robert Carter, Korean War veteran, and I am recording this on March 16, 2021, 2 weeks before my surgery. If you are listening to this, It is because I am gone and my grandchildren are arguing over my inheritance." Marcus visibly paled. He didn't know this recording existed. The voice continued, "I leave my estate to James because he is the only one of my grandchildren who understands what it means to serve something greater than himself." Marcus always measured success in dollars. James measured it in lives saved. A muffled sob echoed from the gallery. It was Sarah Williams, the veteran who had supported me during the intermission. "Marcus came to visit me last week," the recording continued, "and I saw my brother shrink in his chair. Not to inquire about my health or to talk. He brought papers from a real estate agent, wanting me to sign an agreement to sell the land after my death. He said it would be better for the family if the property was converted into capital." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus stared at the table, unable to lift his eyes. "James never asked me for anything," my grandfather continued. "No money, no favors, no promises of inheritance. He just came to visit me when he could, fixed what was broken, and told me about his service. Not about the medals or the recognition, but about the comrades he saved and those he couldn't save." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I hadn't expected the recording to be so detailed, so personal. "Marcus built an impressive business," the voice continued. "But he never built character. James built both. That's why I leave him not only the property, but the responsibility to keep our family's tradition of service alive." When the recording ended, silence stretched on for long minutes. Marcus was completely still, as if he had been physically struck by our grandfather's words. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "Has this recording been authenticated?" "Yes, sir," I replied, handing over the verification documents. "Authenticated by the county forensic lab and 2 witnesses who were present when it was made." Marcus finally looked up, and I saw something I had never seen before: genuine shame. Not the irritation of being caught in a lie, but the devastating realization of how our family, and especially our grandfather, really saw us. "James," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know about." "About what, Marcus?" I interrupted, my own composure finally breaking. "About my service? About the missions? About the people I saved? You never wanted to know. For 8 years, you had countless opportunities to ask, and you chose not to." Marcus's lawyer was scribbling frantically in his notepad, clearly trying to find some way out. But there wasn't one. The recording had completely destroyed his case. "Or are you talking about trying to sell the property behind Grandpa's back?" I continued. "About turning the farm he built with his own hands into a housing development? About reducing a war veteran's legacy to square footage of profit?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't answer. It was at that moment that Judge Morrison did something extraordinary. He stood up again, but this time his gaze was fixed directly on Marcus. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of the bench, "during my career, I have seen many cases of family disputes. But I have rarely seen anyone try to steal the inheritance of a war hero who saved my own son's life." The word "steal" echoed through the room like a gunshot. Marcus tried to stand up to protest, but his legs failed him. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I have here a letter that arrived this morning from Washington, D.C. Apparently, Commander Carter is being considered for a presidential commendation for his action in Helmand. A ceremony at the White House." My own mouth fell open in shock. I knew nothing of any presidential commendation. "The letter came from the Secretary of Defense's office," the judge explained, requesting information about his current address for the ceremony. Marcus looked at me with an expression that mixed horror and disbelief. His wife Jennifer was visibly crying, not out of sadness, but out of shame for her husband. But the biggest twist was yet to come. The judge looked directly at Marcus and said the words that forever sealed the fate of this dispute. "And Mr. Carter, I have bad news for you. Preliminary investigations into your allegations have revealed that you falsified some documents presented to this court. I will be recommending that the public prosecutor's office investigate possible perjury." Marcus fainted. When Marcus finally regained consciousness, 3 paramedics were around him. The courtroom had been partially emptied, but the most important people remained: the judge, the veterans in the gallery, my extended family who had arrived after hearing about the drama, and the prosecutor who had been called in to discuss the perjury charges. Marcus tried to sit up, but his skin was as pale as paper. Jennifer held his hand, but her gaze no longer carried the same unconditional support as before. For the first time, she was seeing her husband through the eyes of others, and the image was not a pretty one. "James," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse. I didn't know about Timothy. About what you did." Judge Morrison approached, his posture still carrying all the authority of his position, but also a vulnerability he rarely showed in public. "Commander Carter, my son wrote to me about you before his last mission. He said you were the kind of leader who made soldiers feel invincible, even in the most desperate situations." I felt a lump in my throat. Timothy had mentioned me in his letters home. All these years, while my own family ignored me, a 19-year-old boy had spoken about me to his father with pride and admiration. "He was a good soldier, sir," I replied. "Brave, loyal. Exactly the kind of person this country needed." The district attorney, a serious-looking middle-aged man, approached Marcus. "Mr. Carter, I must inform you that we will be investigating the documents you presented to this court. Falsifying evidence constitutes perjury, and the penalties are severe." Marcus tried to speak, but could only shake his head. Reality was finally setting in. He had not only lost the property dispute, he had potentially ruined his professional and legal reputation forever. Jennifer stood up abruptly. "Marcus, we need to talk. Now." Her voice had a coldness I had never heard before. It was clear that she was re-evaluating not only this situation, but their entire marriage. In the days that followed, the story spread through town like wildfire. The local newspaper ran a front-page story, "Local war hero honored in court, brother accused of perjury." The narrative Marcus had constructed about himself as the successful son and about me as the military failure completely collapsed. Tom Bradley, the Vietnam veteran, organized an informal ceremony at the VFW Hall 3 days later. Veterans from 3 different generations gathered to honor me. I received an engraved plaque that read, "To Commander James Carter, a hero among us." It was simple, but it meant more to me than any official military recognition. During that ceremony, something extraordinary happened. My father showed up. He stood in the back of the room, wearing a suit he clearly hadn't worn in years, holding his hat in his hands like a nervous child. When our eyes met, I saw tears streaming down his gray face. After the ceremony, he approached me hesitantly. "James," he said, his voice breaking. "I never knew. About the medals, about what you did. Why didn't you ever tell us?" It was a fair question, but the answer was complex. "Because you never asked, Dad. And when I tried to share, you changed the subject or made jokes about me playing soldier." He nodded slowly, painful understanding spreading across his face. "We failed you. As parents, as a family. We were so focused on the success Marcus was achieving that we never saw the heroism you were living." My mother arrived a few minutes later, carrying an old shoebox. "I found this in the attic," she said softly. "All the letters you sent from Afghanistan and Iraq. Your father kept every single one, even when he pretended not to care." I opened the box and saw dozens of letters, some still sealed. They had kept them, but had never bothered to actually read them or respond. It was a perfect metaphor for our family relationship over all those years. "James," my mother continued, "we want to get to know who you really are. We want to understand your life, your service, your accomplishments. If you'll let us." It was a long and painful conversation, but a necessary one. I explained about the missions, the responsibilities, the comrades lost and saved. I told them about the sleepless nights, the nightmares, the difficulty of readjusting to civilian life. For the first time in decades, my parents really listened. Marcus's recovery was more complicated. The perjury charges resulted in a full investigation of his business dealings. It turned out that he had falsified other documents over the years, not just in court. His real estate empire began to crumble as investors and partners distanced themselves. Jennifer filed for divorce after 2 weeks. She had discovered that Marcus had lied to her about many things, not just our family. The man she thought she had married was, for the most part, a fictional construct. 6 months later, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Marcus, calling from a small apartment across town. His voice was different, softer, less arrogant. "James," he said, "I know I have no right to ask this, but could you come here? I need to talk to you." I found him in a one-bedroom apartment that contrasted sharply with the mansion he had lost. He was visibly thin, but his eyes had a clarity I hadn't seen in years. "I lost everything," he said simply. "The business, the house, Jennifer, my reputation. And the worst part is that I lost it all because of my own arrogance and dishonesty." He paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "But you know what's strange? For the first time in years, I can sleep at night. I don't have to keep up lies or pretend to be someone I'm not." Marcus was going to therapy and working a modest job at a hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. "I'm learning the difference between success and meaning," he said. "And I'm discovering that you always knew something that took me 40 years to understand." We talked for hours that afternoon. It wasn't an instant reconciliation. There was too much damage to repair. But it was a start. Marcus began asking questions about my military service, genuinely interested in understanding my experience. It was the first time he really wanted to know my world. 2 months later, the official letter arrived from Washington. The ceremony at the White House was scheduled for the fall. I would be decorated by the president for my service in the Helmand Valley. It was an extraordinary honor that few soldiers ever receive. This time, my entire family attended. My parents, dressed in their best clothes, looked small but proud in the East Room of the White House. Marcus was there too, wearing a borrowed suit but with a genuine smile I hadn't seen since our childhood. When the president pinned the medal on my chest and said, "This man represents the best of the American spirit," I saw my father cry openly. It was the first time I had seen him cry since my grandfather's funeral. After the ceremony, there was a reception where I met other awardees and their families. A general approached me and said something I will never forget. "Commander Carter, I read your mission reports. You didn't just save lives, you saved souls. Some of the men you rescued now lead their own units, inspired by the example you set." That perspective changed everything for me. My service hadn't ended when I left the army. It lived on through the people I had influenced, trained, and saved. It was a legacy that no family dispute could diminish. My grandfather's property became more than just an inheritance. I turned it into a support center for veterans in transition, offering counseling, professional training, and a safe space for those struggling to adjust to civilian life. Knox, now older but still loyal, became our official therapy dog. Marcus volunteered to help with property maintenance on weekends. It was manual labor, humble work, but he did it with a dedication he had never shown for anything before. He was rediscovering the value of honest work and genuine service. If you have followed this journey of a family divided by misunderstanding and reunited by truth, if you believe that honor and integrity always prevail over arrogance and lies, subscribe to the channel. We have more stories of people who found strength in the most difficult moments and turned pain into purpose. Today, when I look out the window of the restored farmhouse and see veterans from different conflicts sharing their experiences on the porch my grandfather built, I feel that I finally understand the true meaning of his legacy. It wasn't about land or property. It was about the continuity of values, about creating spaces where honor is respected and service is recognized. Marcus and I will never be the same brothers we were in childhood. But we have built something better, a relationship based on mutual honesty and earned respect. He has learned that success without integrity is just a temporary illusion. I have learned that forgiveness without accountability is just denial. The last time I was in court was for Marcus's sentencing hearing on the perjury charges. He received community service and a substantial fine, but avoided jail time. As we were leaving the courthouse, he pulled me aside. "James," he said, "thank you for not destroying me when you could have. You showed more honor in your restraint than I showed in my entire previous life." Some battles are not won through destruction, but through transformation. Marcus needed to lose everything he thought defined him to discover who he really was. And I needed to face my family's contempt to finally receive the respect I always deserved. When I drive through town now, people wave. Not because I'm a decorated veteran, but because I represent something the community values: integrity under pressure, service above self, and the courage to remain true to your principles even when no one is watching. The uniform I wore in that courtroom wasn't a disguise or a manipulation. It was simply the truth, finally being seen by people who had chosen to remain blind for so long. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply allow the truth to speak for itself.